The boardroom felt colder than usual that Tuesday morning. I sat reviewing quarterly reports when Richard Talmadge burst through the door, his trademark smirk plastered across his face. "Monica, we need to talk," he announced, not bothering to close the door behind him. My stomach tightened. 15 years at Northbridge Financial had taught me to read his moods, and this wasn't good news. "Effective immediately, you're being let go," he said, arms crossed. "We're restructuring the department, and frankly, we need fresh perspectives." The words hit me like a punch. Around the table, my colleagues suddenly found their papers fascinating, refusing to meet my eyes. Then Richard delivered the real blow. "My nephew Kyle will be taking your position. He's young, ambitious, exactly what this department needs moving forward." Kyle? The 24-year-old who'd been here barely 3 months? My hands trembled as I gathered my papers. Richard continued talking about transition procedures, but his voice sounded distant, muffled. 15 years of late nights, solved crises, and saved accounts reduced to this single humiliating moment. I stood slowly, straightened my blazer, and walked toward the door. My legs felt unsteady, but I refused to break down in front of them. Outside, April sunshine hit my face, but I felt frozen inside. One thought crystallized through the shock. This wasn't over. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at my ceiling, memories flooding back like a relentless tide. I remembered my first day at Northbridge, fresh from business school with my marketing degree, eager to prove myself worthy of the opportunity. I'd started at the bottom, making copies, organizing files, doing whatever needed doing. Nobody handed me anything. I earned every promotion through sheer determination and countless extra hours. Within 3 years, I'd moved from entry-level to managing mid-tier accounts. By year 7, I handled Northbridge's most valuable clients, the difficult ones other account managers couldn't satisfy. I'd mentored junior staff members, trained newcomers, and covered Richard's mistakes more times than I could count. There was the Harrison account disaster when their previous manager completely failed them. I'd worked 72 hours straight rebuilding that relationship, personally calling every contact, fixing every error methodically. Harrison stayed, and their contract doubled within 6 months. Richard took full credit at the board meeting. I remembered the Wellington merger, the Murphy expansion, the Foster acquisition. My work was woven into every major success Northbridge had achieved over the past decade. And now? Replaced by an inexperienced nephew who'd barely earned his business degree. The injustice burned like acid in my chest, keeping me awake until dawn. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. Richard gave Kyle an official building tour while I packed my office. They walked past my door, Richard's voice booming with fake enthusiasm. "This is where the real magic happens," he announced, gesturing at my former workspace like he owned it. Kyle nodded eagerly, his expensive suit hanging awkwardly on his thin frame. He looked barely old enough to be out of college. Colleagues whispered as they passed. Some glanced sympathetically, others looked curious, a few seemed relieved they weren't the ones being escorted out. The gossip had already started spreading. I'd built genuine relationships here, earned respect through consistent competence and fair treatment. Now I was just another cautionary tale about company loyalty meaning absolutely nothing. My desk phone rang, jarring me from dark thoughts. Thomas Foster, one of my largest clients, sounded concerned. "Monica, is it true you're leaving?" he asked directly. "Changes happen in business," I replied carefully, keeping my voice steady despite the anger churning inside. "Kyle will be handling your account moving forward." There was a long, uncomfortable pause. "I specifically requested you for our account," Thomas said slowly. "You understand our needs. This concerns me greatly." I thanked him professionally and hung up, noticing Kyle nearby fumbling with papers, already looking completely overwhelmed by responsibilities he didn't understand. At home, I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen. Part of me wanted to vent everything online, expose Richard's blatant nepotism, burn every bridge with righteous fury. But another part, the strategic thinking that had built my career, recognized that emotional reactions rarely won professional battles. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet and started calculating coldly. Severance package, savings account, monthly expenses. I had roughly 6 months of financial cushion, maybe 8 if I lived carefully. Enough time to plan properly, to be strategic rather than reactive. I wouldn't waste this moment drowning in anger. I'd transform it into fuel for something better. Next, I updated my resume for the first time in 15 years. Seeing my accomplishments listed objectively was almost shocking. Every major account success, multiple leadership roles, industry certifications, and awards. I'd been so focused on proving myself at Northbridge that I'd forgotten my value extended far beyond those walls. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Anderson Phillips, a former mentor from my early career days, had sent a message, heard about Northbridge. Their loss entirely. Coffee this week. I smiled genuinely for the first time since yesterday. Sometimes the universe sends exactly what you need precisely when you need it most. I replied immediately, suggesting Thursday morning. The pieces were already starting to move into position. Anderson's downtown office overlooked the city, all glass and steel stretching toward blue sky. He'd built his consulting firm from nothing, and now it advised Fortune 500 companies nationwide. "Monica," he greeted me warmly, shaking my hand firmly. "You look like someone ready for significant change." Over coffee, I explained what happened, keeping emotions minimal and facts crystal clear. Anderson listened intently, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he leaned back and smiled knowingly. "I have a position opening," he said directly. "Senior Strategy Director at Westbridge Solutions. We're expanding into financial consulting, and I need someone who understands corporate dynamics from the inside out." My heart raced faster. That's a substantial leadership role. "You've been doing that level of work for years without proper title or compensation," he replied bluntly. "Northbridge kept you contained because Richard felt threatened by your obvious competence." The observation stung because it rang completely true. "The position requires relocation though," Anderson continued. "We're opening a new regional office 3 hours north. You'd be building the entire department from scratch. Full authority, very competitive salary." He slid a folder across his desk. Inside was an offer letter with a salary 50% higher than Northbridge had ever paid me. "I need someone who can start within 2 weeks, Anderson added. I didn't hesitate even slightly. "I accept your offer." His handshake was firm and confident. "Welcome aboard, Monica. Let's show them exactly what they lost." The industry conference felt like returning to familiar territory. 3 weeks into my new position, Anderson had strongly encouraged me to attend, network actively, and rebuild my professional presence strategically. The hotel conference center buzzed with executives, consultants, and financial professionals from across the region. I'd attended this same conference for years, always representing Northbridge, always building relationships that ultimately benefited Richard's department and career. Now I represented Westbridge Solutions, and the change in dynamics was immediately noticeable. Former clients approached me, genuinely curious about my career move. Industry leaders who'd heard about my departure from Northbridge expressed real interest in my new role and responsibilities. I collected business cards steadily, scheduled multiple follow-up meetings, and felt my professional confidence rebuilding with each meaningful conversation. Then I spotted Kyle across the crowded exhibition hall, looking completely lost and uncomfortable among seasoned professionals. He was attempting to present to a small group, stammering awkwardly through a pitch I'd actually written months ago at Northbridge. The executives looked politely bored, checking their phones constantly. One simply walked away mid-sentence. I watched Richard swoop in desperately, trying to save the deteriorating situation, but his forced enthusiasm only made everything worse. The group dispersed quickly, leaving Kyle looking humiliated. From my position, I saw Richard's jaw tighten with obvious frustration. Kyle looked devastated. I felt no satisfaction watching this, only recognition that incompetence eventually reveals itself inevitably. My first major project at Westbridge came faster than I'd expected. A mid-sized financial firm desperately needed help restructuring their entire client management system. The timeline was aggressive, the stakes were high, but the challenge energized me completely. I assembled a small, skilled team, outlined clear objectives methodically, and we started working immediately. Within 3 focused weeks, We'd implemented a new tracking system, reorganized their account hierarchy logically, and trained their staff on sustainable practices. The client was absolutely thrilled with results. "You've accomplished more in 3 weeks than our previous consultants managed in 6 months, their CEO told me during our final presentation, clearly impressed. The success didn't go unnoticed in industry circles. Anderson forwarded me an unexpected email from a Northbridge board member requesting consultation services. "They've apparently heard about your recent work," Anderson wrote. "Client satisfaction scores have dropped 20% since you left. They want Westbridge to consult on improving their account management systems." The irony was almost painful. Richard's department was clearly struggling, Kyle was completely overwhelmed, and now they desperately needed outside help fixing problems I'd prevented for 15 years through competent leadership. "Should I accept this?" I asked Anderson carefully. He smiled knowingly. "Absolutely accept it. Professional, objective, focused purely on solutions. Show them what real competence looks like in action." I agreed, already planning my strategic approach carefully. This wasn't about revenge. It was about demonstrating undeniable value. Through various industry contacts, I learned more about Northbridge's deteriorating situation. Richard had dramatically overestimated Kyle's actual abilities and readiness. The Foster account, which I'd carefully managed for 8 years, was threatening to terminate their contract due to consistent communication breakdowns and missed deadlines. The Wellington partnership I'd personally negotiated was stalling completely on expansion plans because Kyle didn't understand their complex business model. Harrison, the crisis account I'd saved years ago, had filed 3 formal complaints about delayed responses and basic mistakes. Richard was scrambling desperately, working longer hours trying to compensate for Kyle's inexperience, but his own skills had grown rusty from years of taking credit for others' actual work. Internal staff morale had dropped significantly. The junior employees I'd mentored felt abandoned, stuck covering for someone who couldn't lead them effectively. 2 of my former colleagues had already left for other companies, citing poor leadership. I kept detailed notes of everything I learned, not for sabotage purposes, but for genuine understanding. If I was going to consult for Northbridge professionally, I needed to know exactly what problems existed and how they developed over time. Each piece of information painted a clearer picture. Richard's nepotism had created a cascade of failures that would take months, possibly years, to repair fully. The entire organization was suffering because leadership had prioritized family connections over actual competence and merit. "Monica, can we talk? This needs to stay completely off the record." The message came from Brian, a former colleague who'd worked under my supervision for 6 productive years. We met at a coffee shop far from Northbridge's downtown office, somewhere we wouldn't be recognized. Brian looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and tension in his shoulders. "It's a complete disaster," he said bluntly, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "Kyle doesn't know what he's doing, Richard won't admit it, and we're all drowning trying to keep everything running somehow." I listened carefully as Brian described the chaos. Consistently missed deadlines, confused clients, projects started then abandoned, unclear direction from leadership, constant firefighting. "The worst part is watching something we built together fall apart," Brian continued, frustration evident. "You spent 15 years creating systems that actually worked. Kyle's been here 4 months and he's undone most of it already." I asked careful questions, gathering information without encouraging gossip or sabotage. Brian wasn't trying to hurt anyone maliciously, he was simply exhausted and desperately frustrated. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. "Because you deserved much better treatment," he replied honestly. "And because I thought you should know your work really mattered. Whatever Richard says publicly, everyone knows Kyle's failing badly." Before we parted, Brian mentioned something crucial. A confidential project with Patterson Industries was going very badly. Kyle had promised deliverables he couldn't possibly produce, and Patterson was seriously considering legal action. That information stayed with me all week. The crisis at Westbridge came without any warning. Our largest client, Quantum Financial, faced a sudden regulatory audit that threatened their entire operations. They needed immediate strategic guidance, and Anderson assigned me to lead the emergency response team. I'd handled similar high-pressure situations at Northbridge, and the muscle memory kicked in immediately and naturally. I assembled my team quickly, reviewed all documentation thoroughly, identified vulnerabilities systematically, and created a comprehensive response plan. For 72 intense hours, we worked around the clock, coordinating with lawyers, accountants, and regulatory specialists. I personally walked Quantum's CEO through each critical step, anticipating questions, providing clear guidance, maintaining calm when panic threatened everyone. When the audit concluded, Quantum emerged not only unscathed but actually received commendations for their organized response and transparent documentation. "You saved us," Quantum's CEO said, shaking my hand firmly with genuine gratitude. "I don't know how you stayed so calm throughout this entire crisis." The success highlighted everything Richard's department lacked: real experience, composure under pressure, systematic problem-solving, and genuine leadership ability. Word spread quickly through industry channels. Within days, 3 new clients requested Westbridge's services, specifically asking for me by name. Then came the unexpected call. Patterson Industries wanted me to consult on their troubled project with Northbridge. They'd heard about my background and recent Quantum success. "We need someone who understands financial consulting and can fix this mess objectively," Patterson's director explained. My first meeting with Patterson Industries required careful handling. They'd hired Northbridge for a complex client integration project, paid substantial fees, and received virtually nothing valuable in return. Kyle had promised sophisticated solutions but delivered only basic templates that didn't fit Patterson's actual needs. "We need this fixed immediately," Patterson's director said firmly. "Either Northbridge delivers properly, or we terminate the contract and pursue legal remedies." I reviewed Kyle's work objectively, keeping personal history completely separate. The problems were glaringly obvious. Fundamentally misunderstood requirements, rushed analysis, solutions addressing symptoms rather than root causes. I rewrote the entire strategy over one focused weekend, creating a framework that actually addressed Patterson's genuine concerns. It drew on everything I'd learned building similar systems at Northbridge, adapted specifically for Patterson's unique structure. Monday morning, I presented the revised plan. Patterson's team looked visibly relieved. "This is exactly what we needed from the beginning," their director said appreciatively. "Clear, practical, actually implementable." The improvements were measurable within 2 weeks. Better workflow, clearer communication channels, increased efficiency throughout. Patterson's satisfaction scores jumped 40% almost immediately. They sent detailed feedback to Northbridge's board, praising the consultation but noting the stark contrast between the original work and my corrections. Richard would see those reports eventually, and he'd know exactly who'd fixed Kyle's mistakes. The thought gave me quiet satisfaction. Anderson nominated me for the Regional Leadership Excellence Award, one of the industry's most prestigious recognitions. The nomination required extensive documentation: project successes, client testimonials, measurable impacts, leadership philosophy. I spent weeks compiling evidence, surprised by how much I'd actually accomplished in just 4 months at Westbridge. The submission included Quantum's successful audit response, Patterson's integration project, 3 smaller client successes, and glowing testimonials from colleagues and clients. My leadership philosophy emphasized competence, integrity, collaboration, and sustainable practices over short-term gains. 2 months later, I received notification that I'd won. The award ceremony was scheduled for the annual industry gala, attended by every major player in financial consulting. News spread quickly through professional networks. Trade publications ran articles highlighting my career trajectory, noting my sudden departure from Northbridge and rapid success at Westbridge. One article quoted anonymous industry insiders questioning Kyle's qualifications and Richard's leadership decisions openly. "Northbridge lost their most valuable asset," one source stated bluntly. "The market is definitely noticing." Richard would see those articles. Kyle certainly would. But I hadn't sought publicity for revenge purposes. I'd simply documented excellence, and excellence naturally draws attention. The recognition felt validating, proof that my value existed independent of Richard's opinion or Northbridge's organizational chart. I was building something real. The message surprised me completely. "Monica, this is Kyle. I need your help desperately." We met at a neutral restaurant downtown. Kyle looked exhausted, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by obvious stress and dark circles. "I'm drowning," he admitted quietly, staring at his untouched coffee. "The Patterson project, the foster account, everything. Uncle Richard keeps saying I'll figure it out, but I don't even know what I don't know." His honesty was unexpected. I'd assumed Kyle was arrogant, entitled, coasting on family connections without caring. Instead, he seemed genuinely overwhelmed and self-aware enough to recognize it. "Why reach out to me?" I asked directly. "Because everyone says you're the absolute best," he replied simply. "And because I saw what you did with Patterson's project. That's the level of work I should be producing, but I have no idea how to get there." I faced a difficult choice. I could refuse, let him fail publicly, watch Richard's department collapse under the weight of its own nepotism. Or I could help, demonstrate integrity regardless of how I'd been treated. "I'll consult with you on Patterson's next phase," I said finally. "But you need to understand something clearly, Kyle. This isn't about doing the work for you. It's about teaching you how to think strategically." He nodded eagerly. "Whatever you're willing to share, I'll learn." Over the next 3 weeks, I coached Kyle through Patterson's project expansion. Not by giving him answers, but by asking questions that forced him to analyze problems deeply and systematically. Patterson's project succeeded beyond expectations. Kyle, following the strategic framework I'd taught him carefully, delivered quality work that satisfied every requirement. The client was genuinely thrilled, praising both the results and Kyle's improved approach. Northbridge's board received glowing feedback about the successful turnaround. At the next quarterly meeting, Richard took full credit. "My nephew has exceeded expectations," he announced to the board, according to Brian's detailed report. "His innovative approach to the Patterson project demonstrates exactly why I promoted him." Richard didn't mention my consultation, my coaching, or the fact that Kyle's innovative approach was literally following my strategic framework step by step. The injustice burned hot in my chest. I'd helped Kyle out of integrity, choosing teaching over revenge, and Richard had twisted it into validation for his nepotism. That evening, I vented to Anderson over coffee. "Did you expect anything different?" he asked gently. "Richard's built his entire career on taking credit for others' work. That's why he felt threatened by you. Your competence made his inadequacies glaringly obvious." "It feels like nothing ever changes," I admitted. "You helped Kyle because it was right," Anderson replied firmly. "That matters more than Richard's recognition. Trust me, Monica. Integrity always wins in the long run. Sometimes you just have to wait for the long run to arrive." His words helped, though frustration lingered. I'd done the right thing, but watching Richard profit from it tested my resolve severely. The unexpected happened 2 weeks later. Kyle requested a meeting with Northbridge's board, without Richard present. According to Brian, who heard from someone in administration, Kyle presented a proposal. Westbridge Solutions should be hired as ongoing strategic consultants, specifically requesting me as the primary advisor. "Monica's coaching completely transformed how I approach problems," Kyle apparently told the board. "She has institutional knowledge and strategic thinking we desperately need. If we want to rebuild our client relationships and operational efficiency, we need her expertise formally involved." The board was intrigued. They'd seen the Patterson success, noticed improved client feedback, recognized that Kyle's performance had suddenly elevated. They didn't know about my informal coaching. Richard opposed the idea vehemently, according to Brian's report. But the board overruled him, concerned about declining performance metrics and client retention. Anderson called me that afternoon. "Northbridge's board wants to hire you as a senior consultant. They're offering a substantial contract, probably trying to repair the damage from letting you go." I felt conflicting emotions. Vindication that they recognized my value, frustration that it took a crisis, curiosity about returning to fix what I'd built. "What do you think?" I asked Anderson. "I think it's your decision," he replied. "But if you go back on your terms, with clear authority and respect." I spent the evening thinking. I spent a week crafting my proposal carefully. If Northbridge wanted my expertise, they'd get it professionally and completely. I outlined a comprehensive strategic plan addressing every problem I'd identified through industry contacts and my consultation work. Client relationship repair, operational efficiency improvements, staff training and development, leadership accountability structures. The proposal was brutally honest. I identified specific failures in Richard's department without personally attacking him, focused on systems rather than individuals, and presented measurable solutions. Most importantly, I included a non-negotiable requirement: direct reporting to the board for this project, not through Richard's chain of command. If they wanted my help, it would be independent and unfiltered. Anderson reviewed my proposal and whistled low. "This is bold." "They need bold," I replied. "Half measures won't fix what's broken." The proposal went to Northbridge's board on a Monday. By Wednesday, they requested an in-person meeting. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing confidence without arrogance. Walking back into Northbridge's headquarters felt surreal, like returning to a former life. The receptionist's eyes widened seeing me. "Monica, welcome back." The boardroom was full, 8 board members, the CEO, and conspicuously, Richard sitting in the corner looking furious. I presented my proposal methodically, walking through each problem and corresponding solution. The board asked sharp questions. I answered with data, examples, and proven strategies. "This analysis is unnecessarily critical," Richard interrupted during my presentation. "You're making our department sound completely incompetent." I kept my voice calm and professional. "I'm identifying specific operational challenges that are impacting client retention and revenue. The data supports every observation." "Data can be interpreted multiple ways," Richard countered, his face reddening. "Your so-called solutions are just criticisms of my leadership." The CEO intervened. "Richard, let her finish." I continued, outlining how restoring client relationships required systematic outreach, personalized attention, and consistent follow-through. All things that had been standard practice when I led the department. "The Patterson Project demonstrates that these approaches work," I concluded. "Client satisfaction increased 40% when strategic frameworks were properly implemented." Richard couldn't stay quiet. That was Kyle's success. "With significant consultation support," I replied evenly, not taking the bait. "Which proves that proper guidance and systematic approaches produce results." The board members exchanged meaningful glances. They weren't stupid, they could read between the lines. When the presentation ended, the CEO thanked me and said they'd deliberate privately. As I left, Richard stormed out behind me. "You're trying to make me look incompetent," he hissed in the hallway. I met his eyes steadily. "Your results speak for themselves, Richard. I'm just offering solutions." The setback came suddenly. Kyle, feeling pressure to prove himself independent of my coaching, attempted a major client pitch without preparation. The client was Baxter Holdings, a potential account worth millions. Kyle's presentation was disastrous. According to Brian's detailed report, he misunderstood Baxter's needs, proposed solutions for problems they didn't have, and demonstrated such fundamental gaps in knowledge that Baxter's CEO walked out mid-presentation. Worse, Kyle had mentioned my consultation work in his pitch, trying to leverage my reputation. When the presentation failed spectacularly, it looked like my strategies were ineffective. Richard seized the opportunity. At the next board meeting, he presented a scathing report blaming the Baxter failure on external consultants who don't understand our current organizational culture. He argued that my proposed strategic plan would create similar disasters, that Westbridge's involvement was undermining Kyle's confidence, and that the board should trust internal leadership over outsider criticism. The board, shaken by the Baxter failure and Richard's forceful presentation, postponed their decision on my consulting contract. They wanted time to reassess the situation. Anderson broke the news gently. "It's a setback, not a defeat." But it felt like defeat. I'd been so close to returning on my terms, with authority to fix Northbridge's problems. Now Richard had outmaneuvered me using Kyle's failure as a weapon. I refused to let one setback destroy months of strategic work. While the board deliberated, I focused on Westbridge's other clients, delivering exceptional results that spoke louder than Richard's spin. I also did something Richard wouldn't expect. I continued helping Kyle, quietly, through email and occasional phone calls. Not for Richard's benefit, but because Kyle deserved support despite being in over his head. "Why do you keep helping me?" Kyle asked during one call. "Your uncle uses every success to undermine me, and every failure to attack my credibility." "Because you're trying to learn," I replied honestly. "That takes courage, especially when you're set up to fail." The comment hung in the air. Kyle was silent for a long moment. "I never asked to replace you," he said finally. "Uncle Richard insisted this position was my opportunity, but I feel like I'm drowning while everyone watches." His vulnerability was genuine. He wasn't the villain here, just a pawn in Richard's nepotistic game. Over the next month, I built quiet alliances at Northbridge through Brian and others frustrated with Richard's leadership. I documented every improvement, every client interaction, every measurable success that resulted from applying strategic principles. I wasn't loud about it, wasn't taking credit publicly, just systematically building an undeniable record of competence. The document arrived anonymously, forwarded through encrypted email to Northbridge's board members and several industry oversight contacts. It was a comprehensive analysis of Richard's department performance over 18 months, comparing metrics before and after my departure. Client retention down 35%, revenue down 22%, staff turnover up 40%, project completion rates down significantly, client satisfaction scores dropped from 91% to 67%. Every statistic was sourced from internal reports, board presentations, and client feedback. The analysis then detailed specific instances of mismanagement: the Foster account debacle, Wellington's stalled expansion, Harrison's formal complaints, the Baxter disaster. It connected each failure to decisions Richard made, often overruling experienced staff or ignoring established procedures. Most damning, it included internal emails showing Richard had been warned about problems but dismissed concerns to protect Kyle. The leak was professional, factual, devastating. It didn't attack Richard personally, just documented objective reality. I didn't create the document, but I recognized information I'd shared with Brian and others during casual conversations. Someone inside Northbridge had compiled it systematically. The board couldn't ignore it. 2 days after the leak, they announced an internal review of departmental performance and leadership effectiveness. Richard tried to spin it as routine evaluation, but everyone knew better. His carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. Richard's response to the board review was predictable: deflection, blame-shifting, and desperate attempts to control the narrative. He claimed the leaked document was fabricated by disgruntled employees. He argued that client losses were due to market conditions, not leadership failures. He insisted that Kyle needed more time to develop, that staff turnover was normal, that problems were being exaggerated by people who resented change. But the board wasn't buying it anymore. They brought in external auditors to verify the leaked documents' claims. Every statistic checked out. They interviewed staff confidentially, and the stories were consistent: poor leadership, nepotistic favoritism, declining standards, talented people leaving because competence was undervalued. They reviewed client feedback directly, and the pattern was damning. Multiple clients specifically mentioned missing Monica, requesting Monica's return, or expressing frustration that quality had declined since Monica's departure. Richard grew increasingly erratic as the investigation proceeded. He micromanaged Kyle obsessively, which only highlighted Kyle's limitations more clearly. He snapped at staff, which drove more people to quietly update resumes. He tried to paint me as the mastermind behind a coordinated attack, which made him look paranoid rather than victimized. Meanwhile, I maintained professional distance, focusing on Westbridge's work while the investigation played out. Anderson advised patience. "Let the process work," he said. "You don't need to push anymore." The board scheduled a comprehensive review meeting for a Friday afternoon. They'd completed their investigation, interviewed everyone relevant, analyzed all data, and prepared their findings. Richard arrived confident, apparently believing he'd successfully defended himself. The board's report was methodical and thorough. They acknowledged Richard's long tenure and past contributions, but documented clearly how his recent leadership had measurably damaged the department. They reviewed the nepotism issue directly, noting that promoting Kyle without proper qualifications or oversight had created cascading problems. Most significantly, They presented their solution. Northbridge needed new regional leadership to rebuild client relationships and operational effectiveness. They decided to create a new regional director position with authority over multiple departments, including Richard's. The position required someone with proven strategic thinking, client relationship expertise, operational management skills, and unquestioned integrity. "We're offering this position to Monica Harding," the CEO announced. Richard's face went white. "She doesn't even work here anymore." "We're aware," the CEO replied calmly. "That's why we're extending an offer to return." I'd been invited to attend the meeting's final portion. Walking back into that boardroom, seeing Richard's shock and disbelief, felt surreal. The CEO outlined the offer. Regional director, substantial salary, full authority over strategic direction, direct board oversight, immediate start if I accepted. "This is absurd," Richard sputtered. "You're rewarding someone who left the company, who's been working for a competitor, who probably orchestrated this entire investigation." "The investigation was based on factual performance data," the CEO replied firmly. "Monica's record speaks for itself, both here and at Westbridge." Richard turned to Kyle desperately. "Tell them how Monica's interference undermined your confidence, how outside consultants confused our strategy." Kyle surprised everyone. He stood, faced the board, and spoke clearly. "Uncle Richard, I need to be honest. Monica didn't undermine me, she saved me from complete failure. Everything I learned about strategic thinking, client management, and professional standards came from her coaching. Without her help, I would have failed much worse than I did." Richard stared at his nephew, betrayed. "Kyle, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly," Kyle continued, his voice steady despite obvious emotion. "You promoted me because I'm family, not because I was qualified. Monica tried to help me anyway, out of integrity, while you took credit for her work. This company needs her leadership, not your nepotism." The boardroom fell silent. Kyle's admission had demolished Richard's final defense. The CEO turned to me. "Monica, we understand if you need time to consider. This is a significant decision." I looked at Richard, then at the board members, then at Kyle who'd found courage to speak truth. "I accept," I said clearly, "on the condition that all terms outlined in my original proposal are implemented." My first week as regional director was carefully planned. I met individually with every department head, including Richard who now reported to me. His office felt different seeing it from this new perspective. "I won't apologize for protecting my family," Richard said stiffly during our meeting. "I don't need your apology," I replied calmly. "I need your cooperation implementing operational improvements." Over the following months, I systematically rebuilt what had broken. Client relationships were restored through personal outreach and consistent follow-through. The Foster account returned after I personally flew out to meet with Thomas. Wellington's expansion resumed once they had confidence in leadership. Harrison's complaints stopped when they received the attention they deserved. Internally, I implemented the strategic frameworks I developed at Westbridge, trained staff on systematic approaches, and created accountability structures that rewarded competence over connections. Staff morale improved dramatically. Brian was promoted to senior manager. Others who'd been overlooked during Richard's tenure received recognition and advancement. The juniors I'd mentored years ago flourished with proper support. Kyle, surprisingly, thrived in a position better suited to his actual skills. I moved him to business development where his enthusiasm and family connections were assets rather than liabilities. With proper training and realistic expectations, he became valuable. Richard eventually left Northbridge, taking early retirement. There was no dramatic confrontation, just quiet acknowledgement that his time had passed. His departure felt less like victory than necessary evolution. 6 months into my role as regional director, Northbridge's transformation was measurable. Client retention had rebounded to 88%. Revenue was climbing steadily. Staff turnover had dropped to almost nothing. We'd won 3 major new accounts. The regional office was profitable again, efficient, and had regained its industry reputation. I stood in my corner office one morning, watching the sunrise paint the city gold, and reflected on the journey. 15 years of loyalty hadn't prevented betrayal, but it had built skills that made recovery possible. Richard's nepotism had temporarily disrupted everything, but competence had ultimately prevailed. The greatest satisfaction wasn't Richard's departure or my promotion. It was watching people flourish when given proper leadership and support. Brian was thriving. Kyle had found his place. The juniors I'd mentored were advancing. Clients trusted us again. My phone rang. It was Anderson. Congratulations on the quarterly numbers. Westbridge misses you, but I'm glad you're where you belong. Thank you for the opportunity when I needed it most, I replied. That evening, I received an email from Richard. Brief, awkward, clearly difficult for him to write. You were right about leadership requiring more than authority. I see that now. I didn't respond immediately, letting the words settle. Eventually, I wrote back, leadership means serving those you lead. I hope you find that understanding valuable moving forward. Closing my laptop, I realized the story wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about staying true to competence and integrity even when neither seemed to matter. Sometimes life sweeps you away from everything familiar, but if you stay steady and trust your abilities, you end up exactly where you belong. I'd proven that patience, competence, and integrity always win eventually. The journey had been difficult, but standing here now, I wouldn't change a single moment. This was where I was always meant to be.